Well, I assume you can read and you know what the premise of this video is, so let's just jump right into it, shall we? So what this video is doing all the 2021 SCRAWLR boxes except for the one I'd already done, starting at the 1st of December until midway through January, around the time the next SCRAWLR box tends to arrive. That does not go quite as well in a title, so you've got the kind of clickbaity one, but you get the general idea. So for a variety of reasons, I only ended up doing the one SCRAWLR box, which you can actually see on my YouTube channel, which, by the way, that print is available on my Etsy. I do have a shop. But around September, I had the idea of doing the rest of my SCRAWLR boxes in 1 month, in one video, and I was gonna see like how I felt, and I was like, I'm not actually gonna do it, and then I did it. Obviously, I'm not using them in the way they're intended to be used. You're kind of meant to get them and then try things out and see if you like them, but I'm not gonna lie, I already have quite a lot of art supplies, and I was able to carry on my general work with the art supplies I already had. I decided to do this because what a waste if I don't use my products, which I pay for. Because I'm me and I like to make things hard for myself, I decided to try and make things easy for myself by giving myself some rules that would hopefully make things easier for me. So rule 1 is I don't have to follow the SCRAWLR challenge. So for those of you who don't get SCRAWLR box, they set you a little challenge to do every month with the supplies, and you create it using just the supplies in the box. I don't have to do them unless I want to. They can absolutely inspire the challenge, and they absolutely did, just didn't have to do them. The main rule is I can absolutely use other supplies to help create the piece. There are a couple of exceptions to this, but it will make sense in the video. This is because sometimes I can't get the effect I want with the equipment supplied. When you're just doing a monthly challenge, this is part of problem solving you do. With me trying to do them all in a month, that was not going to happen. But yes, so I can use any supply, but I need to use the main item from the box. I can't not use that. Something that's worth noting is that this wasn't just doing 11 to 12 pieces in just over a month. I also had, other obligations. I had a wedding to go to, I had families to visit, I had my actual work to do, breaks to take. As interesting as this challenge was going to be, and intense, I knew it was going to be quite intense. I still had my own life to live. So yeah, doing this kind of an exercise in time management. So without further ado, we're going to begin. We start at my family home, and I took 2 boxes home with me that felt very transportable. Yeah, let's just get right to it.
So, alright, we have the first box. This is the June box, and I really liked this one at the time, but I ended up being really busy with work and distracted by a game. It was Persona 5. And I love the theme of fantasy, and one of the inspirations it listed is Renaissance paintings. And I remembered in my Facebook saves, of all things, was a collection of images of Florence Welch looking like a living Renaissance person. I'd saved this back at the start of 2020, so I felt really vindicated that I had this reference saved to paint with. In fact, this is a common theme with the whole of this project, is finding things I'd saved ages ago and being like, yes, I knew you'd come in handy one day. So I've just realised I haven't actually explained what the supplies were. There were these pearlescent paints, which I'm practising with here to paint some magic effects on some character designs. This was just me practising with the paints to see how they worked. And here I am, building the Christmas tree with my mum, because that was one of the reasons why I'd come home. And there it is before it's decorated. And we were going to have my little niece come and help us put baubles and decorations on. But while we waited, I did some practices of those Florence Welch sketches using the pencils they provided, which is not something I use very often, and I don't usually work without line art. And one of the things I wanted to get across, especially from those references, is the movement that Florence Welch exhibits during her performances. So yeah, while I waited, just got some practices out the way, and really liked that first one I did actually. And here's the finished tree. I think it looks lovely. It's got over 30 years of memories on it. And afterwards, I continued finishing off the sketchbook page into the evening, and I'll just leave you with that for a bit. And now we have the finished sketchbook page, including a cover-up of one I didn't like, and the first of many shape challenges where I create an image out of a swatch I did. And now we start the new box, which is the November box. So at the time of filming, this was the current box, so I was quite keen to get this one swatched and see how things work. I don't usually work with pens, so I was very interested to see how these worked and what I could come up with. The booklet that the SCRAWLR Box company gives us said that these are water soluble, which I have to disagree with. To me, they are more smudgeable, which means I just can't use them with water media, which is fine. They did say you could use them as fake watercolours, but I kind of found, aside from a few, that they just didn't really work. So this is a sketch of my friend Jess in Strasbourg, which she visited in 2019 and was once again in my Facebook saves, feeling even more vindicated, which I felt like doing for this challenge, as the colours provided actually gave me like a really kind of crisp wintry feeling. I'm not too sure why. I'm wondering if it's because like the warm colours they provided us were actually like on the cooler spectrum, but they kind of gave me that idea of like a very cold, crisp winter's day. And when Jess visited Strasbourg, it was December 2019. So the pens came with a fine liner tip and a brush tip, which meant I could do line art and colour large areas. And I found they actually layered quite nicely as well. Except I was also quite ill at this point, so I ended up making stupid decisions, like the pavement, where I just covered it with a disgusting snot puke colour for some odd reason. Regretted it instantly, and I think I took a break not long after this because I'm like, I'm making dumb choices. I ended up going over it with the Posca pen and then gouache, breaking from my idea of just using the pens and pencils, but I needed to fix it. I did end up using gouache for her skin as well. But this is fine. As I said at the start, I made myself agree to not limit myself to just using the materials in the box, especially as I wasn't doing the challenges, so to speak. And it was all about what will make the image work, as long as I use the bulk of the month's box to create the image. So this part is very interesting for me to look back on. I remember I was really getting ill at this point, like my cold was really starting to set in. But I was chatting with one of my mates online and just chatting about the process and building up layers and colours, working much more how I'm used to, just with pens, and finding it like really interesting seeing the image come together like this. And yeah, the fine liner nib meant I could go in and get the detail of the architecture, which I think is another reason why when I was searching through images to draw with the pens was why I picked this one, because I knew I could go in with those fine details that I wanted, but in the colour that they actually were on the image. Also, some of the artist inspirations for this image are Jamila Knopf and Lee Ellickson, which is also why Jess has a French bulldog in the picture. In the actual photo, she doesn't have a dog with her, she's just looking at the camera, but I wanted her to be interacting with something in the image, and so I wasn't going to be copying the photograph outright as well. Also, it is so interesting looking back at this footage and knowing I was just at the start of being ill and having no idea how bad it was going to get. But I really enjoyed doing this part, like the reflections and refining some of the buildings, just trying to build up the image to something that was really starting to work properly. But yeah, I was still chatting with my mate. I was having like a really nice time doing this, but just starting to really just blank out certain bits. I just zoned out and then suddenly half of the image was created. I'm like, when did that happen? And ooh, this is the part where I use the pens like the book suggested as fake watercolours. Even though I didn't think they worked, it took a lot of activating to get them to work as watercolours, but I used them for the sky and for the water, and it was actually just quite nice to just do it really and just work how I'm used to working. Except this point I was really starting to flag. I hadn't forgiven myself for the puce coloured pavement. In fact, there I am having a tea, and then I eventually took a nap. I went over with Posca pen, as I mentioned, but it wasn't really working, so I then went over it with gouache, as I mentioned, which just really tied the colours together properly. Speaking of which, I'm also going with pencil crayon, which was always part of my plan to layer the wet media with dry media, just to bring in some textures and colours that I wanted and just make the whole thing work properly. and make it an image that I really liked in the end, despite it not being my usual medium. Okay, side note before I say anything important, look at me go eating this soup. Nom 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 nom. Hadn't anticipated how silly it is filming yourself eating on a time lapse. So the next box I attempted was the September box, which was charcoal and graphite, and the materials provided remind me of the work of Elisa, whose book I have and I'm reading through. And I originally intended to do the challenge from the box, which was landscapes, because I love doing landscapes, but was super inspired by her style and actually ended up being inspired for another piece you'll see later. And I love the equipment and I love gold paint on the blue paper, which was on the cover of the sketch paper we had. But I was so ill at this point. Like, I thought I was getting better. Like, I'd had a cold before and was like, I'll be better in a couple of days. I was not. I was ill for the majority of December, I'm not going to lie. And this was when I was starting to get real bummed out by it, which was starting to reflect on my art a little bit. I drew this, I'm not going to lie, kind of sad image. But, yeah, it was materials I wasn't particularly familiar with, and I wasn't getting it perfectly right first time round. And of course, like, most of the time I'd be, understanding about it, but because I was ill and feeling a bit low mentally, I was like, I'm not an artist, I suck. So, like, yeah, I don't mean to be a bummer, but I was struggling a lot with this one. But seeing it all come together is really nice, especially as it was equipment I was not used to. So I kind of went off on a rant a bit there. I think I should point out that the gold paint was not part of what SCRAWLR Box provided. It is paint I already own, but there was gold paint on the cover of the blue paper they provided as part of my promise to myself to not be beholden to just the materials provided. I decided to use gold paint from the start because I actually love blue and golds together. And this was, of course, once again inspired by Elisa. And as well, using the gold paint tied the image together in a way that made it feel like something I would create, even though it is mostly not materials or a colour scheme I would generally use. And now we jump back to the June SCRAWLR box, which is the pearlescent paint and the watercolour pencils. And I had not intended at all to do a full piece for this. I'd intended to just leave it as the sketchbook page of practices and just that. But I ended up being really inspired by Elisa's work and her use of lines and the kind of swooshiness and the work I had done beforehand based off Florence Welch and the movement of the images and the colours. So I ended up doing a full piece and ended up then tying myself to doing a full piece for every single box for the challenge. So thanks, Beth. Really did a solid for me there. But yeah, I really recommend Elisa's work because she is a master at her craft and she is exceptional at creating guidelines to help move your eye around the image. And I said the swooshiness earlier, but just very much that line work and movement in images, even static ones. So I wanted to create something inspired by her work using materials I'm much more familiar with, and whilst I'm not particularly used to watercolour pencils or pearlescent paints, they are based in watercolour. I ended up having a really nice time in the afternoon just researching this and creating this because I was inspired by underwater photography and a bunch of mermaid images, and I have a whole bunch saved because I try to participate in Mermaid every year, so I could just look through stuff I already had, stuff I was familiar with, and I just put on a load of podcasts and just did a full piece with stuff I knew how to use, which was really what I needed. Although I can see the pressure of trying to finish this appearing in that background is hella messy. I know I can do better, and I did try and go in and fix it later, but we were going on holiday soon and I wanted to have 4 boxes finished before I went away, and I think I was just starting to feel the pressure a bit more. As I say though, I did generally enjoy doing this one, and I did have every intention of just using the materials provided and my purple watercolour, but I was starting to lose some of the values I'd originally intended from the image, so I did go in with some gouache, I believe, and my white pen just to bring back some of the highlights and strengthen some of the colours. And of course went in with pencil crayons because I always do that. And here she is, the finished image, a quite impromptu piece that I ended up really liking and ended up being a standard for the rest of the project. And this was later the same day, because I'm not sure I've mentioned it enough times, but I was ill, and as they were going on holiday soon, so I was experimenting with the Yupo paper, which is a paper that doesn't soak in the paint. So to start off with, I used my Graffitint paint because I know it has loads of textures on it, before using the alcohol inks provided, and loved this. This was exactly what I needed because it was just fun, experimental delight after a quite intense day of finishing a painting. And honestly, I had the biggest smile on my face doing this, and yeah, really loved just the experimental process of it. And look at how that Graffitint paint dried. Yeah, this was what I needed. I loved this so much. Forgot to mention this was the June SCRAWLR box, which is kind of relevant because this was alcohol inks, which smell. They really smell like nail polish remover. And I think the intention is that you do it with like the window open, which I didn't do to start with, and my room stank for days. So the next day I put down some paper so they wouldn't stain my desk. It did anyway. It ended up being a little hectic because I was still very much in the mind of I need to create something and think about it rather than just letting go and letting the process sort itself out, which is very much the key thing with Yupo paper, because you really can't control too much how stuff goes on the paper. It will do what it wants to do and you've got to let it. I did film this at a slower time-lapse speed because I think part of the enjoyment for you and for me is actually seeing the inks move across the paper. And as much as I may have struggled with the process on this day, watching it form is, delightful. I think one of the reasons why I struggled is that the alcohol inks, I couldn't pierce the tops. I don't know what they have in the nozzles, but I swear that's bulletproof because I broke so many pins trying to pierce the top so I could just put them straight on the paper. So I had to use the pipette, which would then get clogged with ink. It would mix the colours and I'd have to put the extender in it, and it just wasn't quite as intended. I didn't have as much control as I'd have liked because I just couldn't use the inks properly. But I got a bunch of pretty groovy looking images as a result, and the one I actually ended up working on later was one I ended up pretty much just scrubbing with the alcoholic extender, which actually gave it a much paler consistency and was something I found myself more inspired by, but onto that later. And this is where I do the shape or silhouette challenge, whatever you choose to call it, where you look for an image within the paint splotches you'd put down. And considering, how Yupo paper works, this seemed particularly perfect to do, especially with the Graffitint experiments I'd done. I found that you had to make sure your pen was juicy and would glide across the paper, otherwise it would take off what you'd already put down. But I really enjoyed just finding images in this one. So the Graffitint paint was something the SCRAWLR box gave us during 2020, and some of the pens that I found worked really well on the Yupo paper, especially over top of the inks, were Posca pens, which is something SCRAWLR box also gave us. And I was really inspired by the new retro wave music I was listening to. And I thought it looked like a kind of really spooky sky, like something you might see in Stranger Things or the comic series Paper Girls. So I just looked at some references of some buildings and created like a very interesting scene. And this ended up being something I really loved doing and might even be one of my favourites from this whole challenge. We'll see how the rest of it goes. I think it's important to say at this point in the video that despite me not doing any of the challenges for a year and struggling with it a little bit at times, it is a strength of getting a subscription service like this, because you don't have to limit yourself to just creating art with the supplies given, but it can be how you create something with the supplies together. And using these alcohol inks and these Posca pens, especially the colours they gave us, just ended up creating something that I absolutely loved and never would have thought to do on my own with the equipment I had beforehand. And this marks the end of the pre-holiday images. I hope you like them.
Doing the first 4 boxes was the hurdliest of hurdles, because at this point I hadn't told many people I was doing this and I could absolutely decide not to do it. So at this point it was, alright, we're doing this now. Me and my housemates all went on holiday together. It was a cosy cabin which we decided to go to as a household before we visited our families for Christmas. But yeah, I had a lovely time on holiday, made sure it was super relaxing, didn't do much work, didn't do much drawing. I did a little bit, but it was mostly taking photos as a reference to draw from later, which hopefully you might see a sketchbook spread of it at some point. We'll see. I don't want to tie myself down to anything and make things more stressful for myself. It was lovely, and when we came back I had the December SCRAWLR box waiting for me, so I decided to open it on camera and get to work on it. We'll now be watching the next segment, which is the kind of after holiday through Christmas to New Year segment. Okay, back from holiday. We have the new SCRAWLR box and I'm going to open it on camera because this is the first time I can do this live. Let's see what this is. That's black paper. Oh my god, there's shiny things. Oh wow, there's original. Yes. Yes, I'm so happy. Oh, we have another Posca pen. Okay, some more paint markers, some more pens. This is like either our 5th or 6th pens this year. This is interesting. Does anyone know what this symbol means? Oh, it's 2B. It says 2B. I thought it was like chess symbols. Sakura gel pens, but in lilac. Oh my god. I'm not gonna lie, I'm really excited for the black paper. I love working on black paper. Oh, this is our print. Oh, it's upside down. Okay.
Right, I'm just quickly showing you my black paper sketchbook, which I've had since before I started to take art seriously, which you see me point at a 2016 sign, like showing how long I've had this. And yeah, that's why I got really excited about the black paper. I feel like I should explain the reason why I sounded a bit exasperated about the black Posca paint marker is because this is like the 3rd or 4th they've sent us now in a couple of years, and I was like, do I really need another one? But that was just a spur of the moment thing, like I wasn't actually that annoyed about it. Anyway, now we skip to the February SCRAWLR box, which is acrylics, my mortal enemy. I just cannot get my head around acrylics, and remember doing like a giant sigh when I got this box, but you know, it makes sense and it's good for me to practice with them. In terms of this piece, I could have hated this more, but it's probably my least favourite so far. Touch wood, it remains my least favourite because, just for information, I'm recording this before I do the last 4 boxes. So what I did like is I liked the freedom to layer. What I didn't like is a lot of other things that I've never liked about acrylics. One thing's being that you can't reactivate them when you put them on a palette. And yes, I know there's ways around it. You can have a wet palette, but I don't have a wet palette because I don't use acrylics. So I'd mix a colour and then it'd be gone. I wouldn't be able to use it again, and that was annoying. I also, like, I know a big part of acrylics is the textures you can get, and I've seen it used, like, to stunning effect with other people who are more used to acrylics. I just couldn't quite get it down properly. I just wasn't really enjoying it. So I think as well, I kind of mentally and physically rushed this one because I was running out of time again, because it wasn't long before I was going to be going home for Christmas. And also, I think I just wanted it done. I just wanted this box out of the way. I did like as well the colours the SCRAWLR box gave us, and these paints are interesting because they're in like these kind of Capri Sun floppy drink palettes, which I found very amusing. And I like the concept I did, even if I'm not too keen on the execution. I do like the idea of like a wintry image on like a balcony, it's sunset, and you could see lights. And I think that's something that I really wanted to try and use with acrylics, because it's not something I can usually do with watercolours. I mean, I can do it a bit with gouache because gouache is opaque, but it just wasn't what I wanted. The execution wasn't quite there. But you know what? It's okay. I had a feeling this would probably be what I would struggle with, and you know what? Like I say, I could hate this more, and you know what? I will take that. That is my glowing review. I could hate this more. Nailed it. Also, I forgot that this new camera is way more sensitive than my old one, and sometimes I just really wanted to focus on the swatch acrylic on the side rather than the painting itself. Oh well. It just goes with the theme of this painting, really. And here I am back at my parents' in my Christmas jammies, and I had brought a couple of boxes home with me to see what I could create. And the first thing I did was the January SCRAWLR box, which was alcohol markers. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little anxious about using these because I come from a time where on DeviantArt, if you were like an artist creating manga images of your original characters and you were a traditional artist, you were basically either a pencil crayon artist or a Copic marker artist, which are alcohol markers. And I was very much a pencil crayon artist, and alcohol markers were these things I could never afford, I would never be able to use, and to me were just fancy felt tip pens, which I didn't get. And this was my first time trying them, and to my surprise, I really, really enjoyed using them. Like, doing this piece made me go, oh, I get it now. Like, I don't know if it was the limited colour palette or the fact that I picked a good pose to copy. Also, this is a self-portrait, by the way, and I also don't really like drawing me. But I really, really liked using them. The only thing I actually regret is colouring in my skin rather than leaving it the white of the paper, but I was liking this so much that I wanted to make it my artist avatar, which you can hopefully see it now is. But I tend to colour in skin, I don't tend to leave it blank, and I was already using equipment that I don't tend to use anyway, so I wanted to make it a more representative of my style. Anyway, these are the pens you saw me opening at the start of this segment, and whilst they took hilariously long to activate, like this is a time lapse and you could see how long it was taking for the paint to actually flow to the end of the nib, they were so nice to use. Like, they flowed really nicely, and I was really excited to create something with them. And given that I'd received this SCRAWLR box within the time that I was doing this video, I thought I'll actually follow the prompt this time, and the prompt was Out of the Darkness. Well, considering we had a coppery bronze and a gold and they were the thicker nibs, I had this idea to do something from like a campfire, and I ended up finding one of my old photos from a live role-playing game I went to, which you could see I actually created many years ago with pencil crayons, and I thought, well, why didn't I do this again but with these gold pens and see how different it looks? And I did. And a nice difference between this and my old piece is that with the pencil crayons, it was all about blending the colours and getting the tones from the picture onto the image, whereas this was limited colours and it was all about the marks I was making with the pens, helped by the shapes of the nibs themselves and the shapes from the illuminated figures by the campfire. I also wasn't tempted to try and get some of my other equipment together like I have done with other pieces. Like I say, I was actually trying to follow the prompt, and you are asked to try and just do it with the equipment you have. But I ended up really liking it. I liked the difference between the two images and what the metallic pens really did for the prompt. The only problem I really have with black paper is that it's actually notoriously hard to transfer online because it picks up the shine of any natural light coming through. But I was super spurred by this one, and it was Christmas. We were having Bucks Fizz with carton orange juice made from concentrate, which is just so us. I was with a lot of my family, and I was really pumped for doing the rest of the prompts between now and the new year. Except I left my recording equipment at home. Whoops. This sort of enforced a break out of me, but I did draw for myself the winning Kodama tree in the game Kodama, and I also did the shape challenge with my acrylic swatches, which I thought looked like a kaiju church from Pacific Rim. And I went to see my best friend for New Year's, and this is her cat Maurice, and I love him. He is the best, and he's such a lovely boy. And we had excellent food, and we played a dragon tea party game, and she played a ginger tea dragon and had a ginger tea, and we had this excellent gold flake glowing gin, which was delicious. Like, I'm not a gin drinker, but this tasted great, and just look at it go. It was delightful, and it was exactly what I needed. The holiday, not the gin, but the gin was an added bonus. So when I came back, my recording equipment was here, and I decided to start off the new year by filling in the sheet I'd put down when I did the acrylic inks, which I still hadn't picked up yet. And to get some use out of the February SCRAWLR box, I decided to use the magic pencil they'd given us, which is a colour changing pencil, and because it has white in it, I don't tend to use it on my regular paper so much because you can't see half of it. But I did it on this, and it was just such a lovely little warm up to do to start out the year. And I really liked the magical pencil and decided to do some other things with it. But for now, have me doing some fun little sketches. And this is the finished piece. I don't like everything on it, but you know what? That's fine. That's not what it was meant to be. But it gave me the idea to do something on some other coloured paper, the blue paper, in fact, from the first segment. And I love that paper, I love that colour, and I was really excited to do something with it. So I actually sped up this one because I think it's around here that the portrait reaches its peak, but I was using the pencil like I would any portrait I'm doing and putting all the details, and something about the photo I was following had like lovely flowery lacy sleeves, but I think actually adding too much detail with this pencil took away the quality of it. So I decided the next day to start again and do another portrait with this pencil because I really liked the quality it created. And I did a portrait which had more detail around the eyes, around the face, but less in the background. And I liked this one fine. But what I liked about the original portrait I picked is that it had all these shapes going on around it, which meant it could pull in the detail on the face. So I redid the portrait that I hadn't scrapped. I still have it and I still like it fine, but decided to focus on what I thought were the strengths of the first piece from looking back at the footage. And yeah, what we have is another favourite piece from this challenge, even though the supply itself is from a box that I knew I would dislike, which was the February acrylics box. And I really like this style of portrait and would love to do more of these. So I'm going to let this piece take you to the end of this segment, which is the after holiday, Christmas, New Year sort of segment. And when you'll next be joining me, it'll be in the firmly in the New Year segment and what comes from the final 4 boxes.
So it's the new year. It's the final 4. At this point, there's no turning back. I've told a lot of people I'm doing this now. It was quite intimidating, really, because I had a box where I was very familiar with the supplies, and I'll get onto that in a second, and the rest of them were pens, which I am not familiar with at all. I am not used to using pens, and it turns out half the boxes for SCRAWLR Box this year were pens. So for the first box, I actually changed it up a little bit because the supplies were these bad boys. These are Daler Rowney Aquafine watercolours. I own this, which is the Daler Rowney Aquafine watercolours, but in pans. So not from a tube. It is different using watercolour from a tube than from a pan, but I didn't want to waste these. I'm more keen to donate them to someone who needs them or someone who's never used watercolour before, as the kind of spirit of the box is giving people supplies I've never worked with before. And I've got all these. The final 4. That's 8. The final 4. Let's see how I do.
Okay, here we go, the final 4. So first I begin with the watercolour one. As I mentioned, I already owned the Daler Rowney paints, so I didn't want to waste anything, so went straight in with painting. I did want to use the Chinograph pencils that came with the box to try and actually keep it as only using supplies from the box, especially since I was using more art supplies from my own collection because I had more colours than the box originally provided. But unfortunately, the Chinograph pencils, which are waxy and can basically be replaced as like fine liners for line art and stuff because water and paint will go right over them, just kept breaking. Like, it's such a shame, but I was sharpening them and was like, oh, I'm ready to go. The lead kept breaking, so yeah, that is a shame that I wasn't able to really use the box at all, but I was able to go back to my roots with this one, which was really nice. So when I started going back into art full time, these Daler Rowney paints that you're seeing here were the first that I bought for myself with some money for my birthday when I decided that I wanted to try watercolour to expand my sort of art palette. And for a long time, all I owned were these Daler Rowney paints and some pens and some pencils. And I didn't have other supplies to sort of help me problem solve. It was just these. All I had were these colours and these mixes I'd create with them, and the limitations that watercolour have, but also what they do when you just work with them. So it was really nice to go back to essentially basics and not use any supplies to help me fix problems, to help add a certain pop of colour, to help add a new effect, but just get what I wanted with these paints. And there's something kind of nicely ironic about going back to basics and the very first supplies I used to use on a giant SCRAWLR box challenge, which is all about finding new supplies and using new supplies. And like, don't get me wrong, I used to buy myself supplies before I got SCRAWLR box, like I was expanding stuff on my own, mostly other watercolours and moving to gouache. But yeah, just the idea of of going back and stripping it all back, stripping all these new supplies back and going back to what I used to do and just how I used to work was really nice. So, this piece, Harpies. Well, I decided for this one I wanted to do the actual SCRAWLR challenge that came with the original supplies, since I was using a whole set of supplies and basically not using the box supplies at all. I was like, alright, just try and actually do something from the box, do the challenge, which was birds of a feather. I decided to do harpies because I could have drawn birds and made this easy for myself, but no, why would I do that? And way back on Tumblr, because yes, I have a Tumblr blog, ages ago I'd saved this post about like mermaids are cool and all, but have you considered harpies? And the original poster had done these ideas about different harpies designs and different harpies you could do, and I was like, that's a fantastic idea, I'm gonna do that. And as I mentioned at the start of the video, I love fantasy and I try and participate in Mermaid every year. And I thought to myself, yeah, this is actually way more me. Like, go back to basics, go back to things you love doing. You love doing character design, you love doing fantasy, you love merging these ideas together. Let's do that. Of course, because I have absolutely no chill, I ended up massively overthinking about how a world with harpies would work. Like, do regular people exist? Do birds exist? Other mythical creatures? How does society work? And also, like, how do arms work with wings? Would we have feet or clawed feet? How does this work? And I went for aesthetics over, well, overthinking, although obviously trying to make it work in a sense. But, like, classic me, can't make these things easy for myself. Anyway, these are a family because I had just recently watched Encanto and was absolutely obsessed. Now you may be wondering, how are these a family and also different birds? I don't know. I don't want to think about that because I'd already thought way too much about this. But I really enjoyed like what the different dynamics would be, and also just really enjoyed painting it. I loved painting the wings on this one especially. Like, I could really use watercolour to, you know, its skills like as a medium, and painting the clothes, and just, yeah, I really did enjoy this and did enjoy the, you know, restrictions I placed upon myself of just using those Daler Rowney paints. And yeah, there are bits and pieces on it where I go, man, I really wish I could have used like a bit of gouache, a bit of white pen, a bit of pencil crayon just to pull certain things together. But this was how I used to work, and I need to remember how to work with limited supplies, because sometimes that's just how it's going to be, and sometimes I might work for a client that only wants something with watercolour, and was just a really good sort of mental exercise and just physical exercise and just artistic exercise to do. I mean, granted, most of the time when you're doing a SCRAWLR challenge, you are just using the supplies from the box, but you get what I mean. The fact that I used to use these supplies a lot and then moved on to different things and bringing together different mediums, essentially creating mixed media pieces, it was a really good thing for me to do. So yeah, I did this one over a period of a few days. The design was quite tricky, actually drawing them out was quite tricky, and yeah, actually painting them was quite tricky. There were a lot of elements to pull together and making sure it all tied together properly, but I really enjoyed doing this one, working in comfortable territory, again with watercolours, but allowing myself a challenge with some quite difficult designs and the limitations of it. And here are the siblings in all their glory. I hope you like these ones. And here are the August SCRAWLR box swatches, which was all about acrylic markers. Now, I'd been wanting to paint this rock for a really long time, or just use it in my art somehow. And this rock is called a bismuth rock. And this was on my notes, written in capitals and bolded, because I kept forgetting what this rock was called. And I'd be like, alright, time to, what was this rock called? And I'd be like, cool looking rock on Google. And No. Geometric rock. Nope, not working. Okay, I know it begins with B. B-rock. No, I don't mean the music. Eventually I got there, but it was a whole palaver in itself trying to remember what this rock was called. And you can see me going straight in with pen, figuring out how the rock works, doing the different line effects, which is part of what attracted me to it in the first place. And this was me practicing before doing the main piece. And for the main one, I went in a little less boldly with pencil because, yeah, it still got a lot of dimensions to it and a lot of things going on, and I wasn't entirely confident with it, even though I'd done a lot of practice. So I was kind of inspired by the box's original prompt, which was digital dystopia, as I found the geometric forms that the rock takes make like an excellent template for like a floating cityscape. Like it originally reminded of like Asgard peeking through the clouds, which isn't entirely cyberpunky or digital, but I think the colours of it, like those blue and greens and yellows, really sort of inspired that digitalness. Now I'd got it into my head, because I hadn't looked at the box for ages, that we'd had a blue, a green and a yellow, and was like, oh, when I saw there wasn't a yellow. And I think a weakness of this box, even though the supplies are really cool, was that they essentially gave us two black acrylic markers. Like one's more of like a very thick fine liner and one is a black acrylic marker, but as you'll see earlier on in the video when I was a bit like kind of surprised that we had another black acrylic marker, is that we get this supply a lot, and I think for this box they could have put in like a trio of colours rather than two black markers essentially. Like I don't think I used the black marker at all, so as you can see I went in with my Posca pens as well, which, you know, works with the rules I'd set myself, that I can use other supplies where they're needed, and use them how I use a lot of Posca pens and, well, just acrylic markers anyway, which is, you know, watering them down and then going in with pen when I want bolder colours. So I think this piece is kind of the most successful in that it's a strong mixture of me using supplies in a way I'm used to, which is watering them down like paint, and how they're originally intended to be used, like, you know, pens and markers. So I actually really like this piece as this kind of nice combination of styles, or more this hybrid of using supplies how I'm used to working and how they are intended to be used. So whilst I think on this challenge I've kind of lost the city in the clouds sort of concept, it's now just pretty rock floating in pastel-y clouds, I definitely want to revisit this at some point, and probably using these supplies as well. I think they really work for the concept. And now this is the March Scrawler box. However, in this video, it is the Pen Ultimate box, because it's a pen themed box and it's the second to last one. Anyway, so when I got this box, I was actually really uninspired, not gonna lie. Like, the supplies just didn't really intrigue me, and I was just kind of like, alright, this just isn't my box, it's fine. But, you know, part of the challenge was to do everything, all these boxes, so here I was gonna do it. And yeah, it was more pens, and I didn't use the colours in the end because I just was not really inspired by them, and the box itself to me was more about the different pens and the line weight of them rather than the colours. Like, I believe the Scrawler challenge itself was called Leading Lines, so I kind of and ahed over different ideas. Like, they had this grey pen that they supplied us with, and I was like, I could do something with that, like building up values, but I also have this entire set of grey pens that I would just probably use, and then they would completely override this pen. So what I decided to do in the end was actually go back to basics again and just do some portraits with some thick liners and stuff I'm not used to. Like, I do remember when we got this box, my friend Emily, otherwise known as Nem, messaged me like, Beth, did you see how thick the liner is? And I was like, oh yeah, it's a 0.01, right? And she was like, check again. It was a 1. I was like, is this even legal? And like, anyone who kind of knows me and knows my style is that I barely go over like 0.3. Like, I'm not really someone who uses thick liners. Like, I've tried recently to get a bit thicker and bolder in my line work, especially after getting into things like Arcane and Persona 5, which really works with the thick lines and the bold shapes. And this box actually felt like the perfect time to actually try that, and it was working with the theme, and that was what I decided to do in the end. Yeah, as it was the second last box, it was just a very light pressure thing, even though of course I've given myself pressure by overthinking what challenge to do. But yeah, no colours, just practicing some portraits, which I love doing, and leaving it at that. And you know what? That's exactly what I needed. And it was literally later that night I decided to go out and try the final box because, oh my god, it's the final box! I'm nearly done! And this was the October box, which was Copic markers, which is very exciting because, like I said earlier in this video, Copic markers was this thing other people had when I was younger and I was never going to have because they were so expensive. And yeah, Copic markers are expensive, and the colours were so bright, and it was such a cool box, and I was really excited to give these a try and see how they worked and come up with an idea for it. Now, I don't want to end on a downer, so I'm not gonna, but hoo boy, actually working with these was really hard. Like, I say, the colours are lovely and gorgeous, but trying to make them work together was actually really hard, especially if you're not used to alcohol markers. And I was actually really excited to use these, which is why I actually made these the last box, because as you'll have seen earlier in the video, I tried alcohol markers for the first time and really enjoyed them. And I was like, okay, I'm going to really enjoy these as well. And yeah, I like how they work, they're very interesting. But I think why I liked the previous alcohol markers so much was that the colours they gave us were on the same kind of monochromatic scale. Like, even if they weren't quite the same colour, they were, you know, in the same kind of colour grouping, colour family, whereas these are a bunch of primary colours, which is fantastic. You know, colour theory, you can make them all work together to create new colours, but they don't work the same way as paints do or watercolours do. And the problem is that, and oh god, I know the term for this and I can't think of it right now, but the intensity of the colours, saturation, the way they worked, they were all competing against each other. So actually working with them was really hard, and this piece you see me doing now was actually my second attempt because I just was really struggling to make the colours work and harmonise together, and I had to bring in the pens I used from the very first full challenge I did, which was the November box, to actually pull back the colours a bit, and you'll see me later going with pencil crayons doing the exact same thing. So with this one, they were basically more of a base to the full piece rather than creating something where they are the stars of the piece. But you know, I was running out of time. This was the last box and I kind of wanted to end with not so much as a bang, but I did want it to be a good strong piece, and I needed to bring in the big guns, stuff I was familiar with, to make this work. And I mean, yeah, it's pens, a medium I'm not used to working with, which SCRAWLR Box this year was able to really introduce me to and really help me get to grips with a medium I never really thought I'd try. Like, not just alcohol markers, but pens in general. Like, I owned a few Posca markers and that was about it. And you know, actually looking at the footage now, you know, I'm using the previous alcohol markers and I'm using that November box, which was the first one I did a full piece of, to bring this together. And yeah, whilst it isn't quite the spirit of the challenge of just using the supplies, I think it is showing the strength of getting a subscription box like SCRAWLR Box, is that I now have these supplies, and yeah, most of the stuff I'm using on this came from SCRAWLR Box. Yes, I'm using my own fine liners, and some of the pencils I use later are my own, but most of them were the Posca pencils I got from the May box, and was able to essentially create a piece with all these supplies because I now have them. And I think actually that's a really nice way to end this whole thing is, okay, yeah, I struggled with this, but I was able to bring in all these supplies I have because of SCRAWLR Box to make this piece work and come together. And whilst it is a shame that I wasn't able to use the supplies as I got them and kind of do SCRAWLR Box as it's intended, I'm glad I was able to do this, you know, and, you know, I'll see if I'll continue getting SCRAWLR Box because I do now have a lot of supplies, and I wasn't able to do the challenges this year because I had other commitments and other things I need to do with the supplies I already owned. But it is nice to see this happen, you know. And is this my strongest piece in my set? I don't know, it's up to you. I don't think it is, but that's fine. And it's a little cute image to end this whole series on, and I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of me and this whole thing I've done. Like, I've worked with art supplies I never expected to work with, did more than 11 pieces because I would do other things, did stuff I didn't know I could do, and set myself a challenge and saw it through, and that is really awesome. And yeah, I am really proud, and I'm really happy that I managed to achieve so much and happy with the work I did.
Let your problems go on until my whole body burns out. I ain't never gonna slow down. I ain't never gonna slow down. I ain't never gonna slow down.
I did it! Yes! Okay, so general feelings on doing this. This was quite hard because I mentioned a lot at the start that I was actually quite ill during December, and that slowed me down a bit, and I left my filming equipment at home, but it did force me to take a break, and I wouldn't have done this if I felt like I couldn't have lived a normal life alongside this. Would I do this again? No. Hopefully, as I get more SCRAWLR boxes, I will actually do them in the month they arrive. So my question is, as a bit of a self-esteem thing, what did you like the best? I actually kind of found I liked more of the experimental sketchy side stuff, such as the graffitied on Yupo paper I did and the magic pencil on blue paper. And I think it's because they were quite experimental and unexpected, and I like them as finished pieces even though they are more of a sketchy style. I am actually considering releasing a digital zine of everything I created for this as like a little package all together, and because it's a digital zine I won't be spending a whole load of money on stuff that people might not buy, so if people would be interested in that, then that would be fantastic. But yeah, that's it done, and I'm really proud of what I achieved. I'm going to sign off now because this video is already way longer than anything I do. I'm excited to see what comes from me having learned these new supplies and being able to spend more time with them as well. I think one of the key problems I had is that I was trying to do stuff very quickly and I couldn't spend time with each one like you can if you get it as a monthly subscription and you do it in the month that arrives, Beth. I will hopefully see you soon. Hope you enjoyed the video and take care everyone. Bye!